Question 1. Research into a proposed modification to a critical aircraft component indicates a significant cost reduction if implemented. The supplier assures that the new component meets all necessary specifications. However, a preliminary review suggests that, while the component functions, its long-term reliability under extreme operational conditions has not been as extensively tested as the current part. What is the most appropriate course of action for the engineering team to ensure compliance with aviation safety regulations and ethical responsibilities? Option A. Implement the modification and initiate a post-implementation reliability study to gather data on its performance in real-world conditions. Option B. Reject the modification outright due to the lack of extensive long-term reliability testing, prioritizing the known performance of the current component. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive safety risk assessment and regulatory compliance review, including independent testing if necessary, to thoroughly evaluate the proposed component's suitability before any implementation decision is made. Option D. Proceed with the modification, relying on the supplier's assurance and the cost savings, as the component is functional. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the modification, relying on the supplier's assurance and the cost savings, as the component is functional. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between immediate cost-saving pressures and the long-term implications of product safety and regulatory compliance. Boeing, as a global aerospace manufacturer, operates under stringent safety regulations and a corporate culture that prioritizes airworthiness. The challenge lies in balancing financial objectives with the absolute imperative of maintaining the highest safety standards, which are non-negotiable and directly tied to public trust and regulatory approval. A decision made solely on cost reduction without a thorough safety assessment could lead to severe consequences, including accidents, loss of life, reputational damage, and significant legal and financial penalties. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, risk-based decision-making process that prioritizes safety and regulatory adherence above all else. This aligns with the core principles of aerospace engineering and manufacturing, as well as the overarching regulatory frameworks governing aviation safety. Specifically, it requires a thorough review of the proposed change against all applicable Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) regulations, Boeing's own stringent internal safety standards, and industry best practices. This includes conducting a comprehensive safety risk assessment to identify any potential hazards introduced by the change, evaluating the severity and likelihood of these hazards, and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies. If the proposed change introduces any unacceptable risk, it must be rejected or modified. This approach represents best professional practice because it upholds the ethical obligation to protect the flying public and ensures compliance with legal mandates, thereby safeguarding the company's long-term viability and reputation. It embodies a proactive and responsible engineering culture. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the change solely based on cost savings without a rigorous safety and regulatory review is a critical failure. This approach disregards the fundamental principle that safety is paramount in aviation and violates numerous FAA regulations, e.g. 14 CFR Part 21, concerning certification of products and parts and ethical obligations. It prioritizes financial gain over human life and regulatory compliance, which is professionally unacceptable and potentially illegal. Approving the change based on the supplier's assurance of compliance without independent verification is also a failure. While supplier relationships are important, Boeing retains ultimate responsibility for the airworthiness of its products. Relying solely on a supplier's word, especially for a safety-critical component, bypasses essential due diligence and could lead to the incorporation of non-compliant or unsafe parts, violating regulatory oversight and Boeing's own quality assurance protocols. Delaying the safety assessment until after the change has been implemented is a severe dereliction of duty. This reactive approach is fundamentally flawed, as it places the public at risk during the interim period. Regulatory frameworks mandate that safety assessments precede implementation, not follow it. This failure demonstrates a disregard for established safety management systems and regulatory requirements, exposing the company to immense liability. Professional reasoning. Professionals in the aerospace industry must employ a structured decision-making framework that integrates safety, regulatory compliance, and business objectives. This framework typically involves 1. Problem identification, clearly defining the proposed change and its potential impact. 2. Information gathering, collecting all relevant data, including technical specifications, regulatory requirements, and safety assessments. 3. Option evaluation, analyzing each potential course of action against established criteria, with safety and compliance as the primary filters. 4. Risk assessment, quantifying and qualifying potential risks associated with each option. 5. Decision-making, selecting the option that best balances all factors, with an absolute veto for any option that compromises safety or regulatory compliance. 6. Implementation and monitoring, executing the chosen decision and continuously monitoring its effectiveness and adherence to standards. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with the highest professional and ethical standards. Question 2. System analysis indicates a proposal to reduce manufacturing costs by sourcing a critical component from a new, lower-cost supplier. The existing supplier has been used for years, and the proposed supplier offers a significant price reduction. The proposal suggests proceeding with the change based on the new supplier's assurances of meeting all specifications and a brief review by the procurement department. What is the most appropriate decision-making approach to ensure compliance with aerospace industry standards and ethical obligations? Option A. Obtain approval from senior management based on the new supplier's documentation and the procurement department's recommendation, bypassing the quality assurance team. Option B. Accept the new supplier's assurances of quality and specifications without further internal verification, as this will expedite cost reduction. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive review of the new supplier's quality control processes and product samples by the company's independent quality assurance department before approving the change. Option D. Proceed with the change immediately, as the procurement department has vetted the supplier and the cost savings are substantial. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive review of the new supplier's quality control processes and product samples by the company's independent quality assurance department before approving the change. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between immediate cost savings and long-term safety and compliance. The pressure to reduce expenses can lead to overlooking critical quality control measures, which in a highly regulated industry like aerospace can have severe consequences. The decision-maker must balance financial objectives with the paramount responsibility of ensuring product safety and adherence to stringent regulatory standards. This requires a robust decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance above short-term financial gains. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough, independent review of the proposed cost-saving measures by the Quality Assurance Department. This aligns with best professional practice in the aerospace industry, which is governed by strict regulations such as those enforced by the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, in the United States. The FAA mandates rigorous oversight and quality control to ensure aircraft safety. By involving the quality assurance team, the company ensures that any proposed changes are evaluated against these safety and regulatory requirements before implementation. This proactive approach mitigates risks, prevents potential noncompliance, and upholds the company's commitment to safety, which is a core ethical and regulatory obligation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the cost-saving measures without independent verification by quality assurance is a direct violation of the principles of due diligence and regulatory compliance. This approach risks introducing defects or compromising the integrity of the manufacturing process, potentially leading to safety incidents and significant regulatory penalties from bodies like the FAA. It demonstrates a failure to uphold the ethical responsibility to prioritize safety and a disregard for established quality control protocols. Relying solely on the supplier's assurance of continued quality without internal verification is also a regulatory and ethical failure. While supplier relationships are important, the ultimate responsibility for product safety and compliance rests with the manufacturer. This approach outsources critical oversight, which is not permissible under aerospace regulations. It exposes the company to risks if the supplier's quality control falters, leading to potential breaches of safety standards and legal liabilities. Seeking approval from senior management based on the supplier's claims, without the input of the Quality Assurance Department, bypasses essential checks and balances. This approach prioritizes expediency and management approval over technical and safety validation. It creates a significant risk of overlooking technical flaws or non-compliance issues that only a specialized quality assurance team can identify, thereby failing to meet regulatory obligations and ethical standards for product integrity. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this industry should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core problem and its potential impacts. This involves assessing risks against regulatory requirements and ethical principles. The framework should include steps for gathering information from all relevant departments, particularly those responsible for safety and compliance. A critical step is to seek independent validation of any proposed changes that could affect product integrity or safety. Finally, decisions should be made based on a comprehensive understanding of the risks and a commitment to upholding regulatory and ethical standards, even if it means foregoing short-term financial benefits. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a recent operational incident at a manufacturing facility may have released a previously contained chemical into the surrounding environment. To address this, which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional best practices for impact assessment? Option A. Rely exclusively on past environmental incident reports from similar facilities to estimate the potential impact of the current event. Option B. Immediately resume full production to meet delivery schedules, deferring any environmental assessment until after the backlog is cleared. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive environmental impact assessment that identifies all potential affected environmental media, evaluates the extent and severity of contamination, and develops a detailed mitigation and monitoring plan. Option D. Conduct a rapid, high-level review focusing only on immediate, visible environmental changes to expedite the resumption of operations. The correct answer is B. Immediately resume full production to meet delivery schedules, deferring any environmental assessment until after the backlog is cleared. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational continuity with the long-term implications of potential environmental impact. The pressure to resume operations quickly can lead to overlooking or downplaying significant risks, necessitating a robust and objective impact assessment process. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and systematic evaluation of potential environmental consequences, including identifying all relevant stakeholders, thoroughly assessing the scope and severity of potential impacts, and developing appropriate mitigation and monitoring plans. This aligns with best professional practices in risk management and environmental stewardship, which are often mandated by regulatory frameworks like the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, guidelines and industry best practices for aerospace manufacturing. Such an approach ensures that decisions are informed by data, minimize harm, and comply with environmental protection laws. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to prioritize immediate operational resumption without a thorough environmental impact assessment. This fails to comply with environmental regulations that require due diligence in assessing and mitigating potential harm. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for corporate social responsibility and potential long-term environmental damage. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial assessment that only considers obvious, short-term impacts, ignoring cumulative or indirect effects. This is a failure of professional diligence and can lead to unforeseen environmental problems, violating regulatory requirements for comprehensive impact analysis. It also represents a failure to uphold ethical obligations to protect the environment. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on historical data without considering the unique circumstances of the current incident. While historical data is valuable, each incident has specific contributing factors and potential consequences that may differ from past events. Failing to adapt the assessment to the current situation can lead to an incomplete understanding of risks, violating regulatory mandates for a current and relevant assessment, and demonstrating a lack of professional judgment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the scope of the impact assessment. This involves identifying all potential environmental receptors and pathways of exposure. Next, a thorough data collection and analysis phase is crucial, utilizing both historical information and incident-specific data. This should be followed by a rigorous evaluation of the significance of identified impacts, considering both likelihood and severity. Finally, the development and implementation of a robust mitigation and monitoring plan, along with clear communication to all relevant stakeholders, are essential steps. This systematic approach ensures compliance, minimizes risk, and upholds ethical responsibilities. Question 4. Which approach would be most effective in evaluating the potential consequences of introducing a new software feature into an existing complex operational system, considering both immediate and long-term implications? Option A. Perform a quick technical review of the new feature's code and immediate system compatibility, assuming that any significant issues will be addressed post-launch. Option B. Conduct a thorough impact assessment that involves detailed analysis of system dependencies, user workflows, and potential operational disruptions, including consultation with key stakeholders and scenario planning for various outcomes. Option C. Focus the assessment solely on the technical performance metrics of the new feature, disregarding its integration with broader business processes or customer experience. Option D. Defer any formal impact assessment until after the new feature has been deployed to observe its real-world performance and address any emergent problems. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough impact assessment that involves detailed analysis of system dependencies, user workflows, and potential operational disruptions, including consultation with key stakeholders and scenario planning for various outcomes. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a new product launch with the potential long-term consequences of inadequate impact assessment. The pressure to meet market demands can lead to shortcuts, but failing to thoroughly evaluate the impact of a new product on existing systems, customer experience, and operational efficiency can result in significant financial losses, reputational damage, and regulatory noncompliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the assessment process is robust enough to identify and mitigate risks without unduly delaying a critical business initiative. The correct approach, conducting a comprehensive impact assessment that includes stakeholder consultation and scenario planning, represents best professional practice. This aligns with general principles of responsible product development and risk management, which are implicitly expected in professional environments like Boeing, while specific regulations for a Boeing hiring assessment test are not provided. The underlying ethical and professional standards dictate a proactive and thorough approach to understanding the ramifications of business decisions. This method ensures that potential issues are identified early, allowing for informed decision-making and the development of effective mitigation strategies. It demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to delivering a high-quality, well-integrated product, an approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness. By only performing a superficial review of potential impacts, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to unforeseen system incompatibilities, customer dissatisfaction due to poor user experience, and operational disruptions, all of which could have financial and reputational repercussions. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on the technical aspects of the product without considering its broader business and customer implications, is also professionally unacceptable. This narrow focus ignores the interconnectedness of business operations and can lead to the introduction of a product that, while technically sound, fails to meet business objectives or alienate the customer base. A third incorrect approach, delaying the assessment until after the product launch, is the most egregious failure. This demonstrates a lack of foresight and a reactive rather than proactive risk management strategy, which is contrary to professional standards of care and could expose the organization to significant liabilities and operational chaos. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This begins with clearly defining the scope and objectives of the assessment. It then involves identifying potential impacts across various domains: technical, operational, customer, financial, regulatory. Subsequently, the likelihood and severity of these impacts should be evaluated. Based on this evaluation, mitigation strategies should be developed and implemented. Finally, a process for ongoing monitoring and review should be established to ensure that the initial assessment remains relevant and that any new risks are identified and addressed. This iterative and comprehensive approach ensures that decisions are informed by a thorough understanding of potential consequences. Question 5. The review process indicates that a Boeing engineering team is developing a next-generation aircraft with a novel, highly efficient propulsion system that utilizes advanced materials and a unique energy conversion mechanism. While preliminary internal testing suggests significant performance gains and no immediate safety concerns, the propulsion system's core technology is not explicitly covered by existing FAA certification standards for aircraft engines. The team is eager to accelerate development to gain a competitive advantage. What is the most appropriate course of action for the engineering team regarding the regulatory compliance of this novel propulsion system? Option A. Initiate a dialogue with the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, to discuss the novel aspects of the propulsion system and collaboratively determine the appropriate certification pathway, which may involve developing new standards or adapting existing ones. Option B. Seek an opinion from an independent aerospace consulting firm regarding the system's compliance with general aviation safety principles, and proceed based on their recommendation without direct FAA engagement at this stage. Option C. Proceed with the development and testing of the propulsion system, assuming that its superior performance and internal safety assessments will satisfy future FAA certification requirements without direct pre-approval. Option D. Modify the propulsion system's design to more closely align with existing FAA-certified engine technologies, even if this compromises some of its innovative advantages, to ensure a smoother certification process. The correct answer is A. Initiate a dialogue with the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, to discuss the novel aspects of the propulsion system and collaboratively determine the appropriate certification pathway, which may involve developing new standards or adapting existing ones. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid innovation and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to ensure safety and compliance in the aerospace industry. The need to balance speed with thoroughness, especially when dealing with novel technologies, demands careful judgment and a robust understanding of the applicable regulatory framework. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the established regulatory framework, specifically the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA regulations governing aircraft design and certification in the United States. This approach demonstrates a commitment to safety, a core ethical and legal obligation in aerospace. By engaging with the FAA early and transparently, the engineering team ensures that the proposed innovative propulsion system is evaluated against existing standards, or that a clear path for new standard development is established. This proactive engagement mitigates risks of costly redesigns, delays, and potential safety compromises. It aligns with the principles of due diligence and responsible innovation, ensuring that technological advancement does not outpace safety assurance. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with development without explicit FAA approval for the novel propulsion system, even if it appears to meet general performance metrics, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This bypasses the mandatory certification process, which is designed to identify and mitigate potential hazards that might not be immediately apparent. Such an action could lead to the aircraft being deemed unairworthy, resulting in severe financial penalties, reputational damage, and most critically, jeopardizing public safety. Another incorrect approach, which is to assume existing certification pathways are sufficient without consulting the FAA on the novel aspects of the propulsion system, is also flawed. While seemingly efficient, it risks misinterpreting or inadequately addressing the unique challenges posed by the new technology, potentially leading to a certification denial or the imposition of burdensome operational restrictions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the proposed innovation against the relevant regulatory landscape. This includes identifying any novel elements that may not be covered by existing regulations. The next step is to proactively engage with the regulatory authority, in this case, the FAA, to seek clarification, guidance, or to initiate the process for developing new standards if necessary. Transparency, thorough documentation, and a commitment to safety should guide all interactions and development efforts. Professionals must always err on the side of caution when safety is concerned and prioritize compliance with established legal and ethical obligations. Question 6. The analysis reveals that a new aerospace component developed by Boeing utilizes an innovative material with potentially superior performance characteristics. However, the accelerated development timeline has led to a debate within the engineering team regarding the extent of independent third-party validation required for its certification under FAA regulations, particularly concerning the material's long-term durability under extreme flight conditions. One faction argues that extensive internal testing, coupled with simulations, should suffice given the material's advanced nature and the urgency to market. Another perspective emphasizes the need for comprehensive, independent testing and formal submission of all data to the FAA for review and approval before any flight integration. A third viewpoint suggests that a limited scope of external validation, focusing only on the most critical failure modes identified internally, would be a pragmatic compromise, which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework and best professional practice for ensuring the safety and certification of this new component. Option A. Conduct a limited scope of external validation, focusing only on the most critical failure modes identified internally, as a pragmatic compromise. Option B. Rely primarily on extensive internal testing and simulations, considering the material's advanced nature and market urgency, with minimal external validation. Option C. Seek an exemption from certain FAA testing requirements by highlighting the material's innovative nature and potential market advantages. Option D. Prioritize comprehensive, independent testing and formal submission of all data to the FAA for review and approval before any flight integration. The correct answer is D. Prioritize comprehensive, independent testing and formal submission of all data to the FAA for review and approval before any flight integration. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid innovation and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to ensure safety and compliance in the aerospace industry. The pressure to accelerate development cycles, while understandable from a business perspective, must be balanced against the absolute priority of adhering to established safety standards and certification processes. Misjudging the level of regulatory scrutiny or attempting to bypass necessary validation steps can have severe consequences, including safety risks, significant financial penalties, and reputational damage. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough and documented understanding of the applicable regulatory framework, specifically the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) regulations governing aircraft design and certification in the United States. This involves proactively engaging with regulatory bodies, conducting rigorous testing and validation, and maintaining meticulous records throughout the development lifecycle. This adherence ensures that the new technology meets all safety and performance requirements before it is introduced into service, thereby safeguarding public interest and upholding the integrity of the aviation system. An incorrect approach that attempts to expedite the certification process by relying solely on internal testing, without independent verification or formal submission to the FAA for approval, would represent a significant regulatory failure. This bypasses the essential oversight mechanism designed to ensure objectivity and compliance. Another incorrect approach, such as downplaying potential risks or omitting critical data from regulatory submissions, constitutes an ethical and regulatory breach. This demonstrates a lack of transparency and a disregard for the safety-critical nature of aerospace development. Such actions undermine trust between the manufacturer and the regulatory authority, and more importantly, compromise the safety of the aircraft and its occupants. Professionals in this field must employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant regulatory landscape. This involves identifying all applicable statutes, regulations, and advisory circulars. Subsequently, a risk assessment should be conducted, evaluating potential hazards associated with the new technology and the likelihood of their occurrence. This assessment should inform the development of a robust testing and validation plan that aligns with regulatory expectations. Throughout the process, clear and accurate documentation is paramount, serving as evidence of compliance and facilitating communication with regulatory agencies. Finally, a culture of ethical responsibility and a commitment to safety must permeate all decision-making, ensuring that commercial pressures never supersede regulatory obligations. Question 7. The assessment process reveals that a research team has identified a significant technological breakthrough with potentially substantial positive implications for the company's future revenue. The team is eager to announce this discovery immediately to generate excitement and potentially boost stock value. However, the findings are still in their early stages and require further validation and detailed analysis to fully understand their commercial viability and potential impact. Which of the following approaches best balances the desire for timely communication with the regulatory obligation to ensure accurate and non-misleading disclosures to the market? Option A. Immediately issue a press release announcing the breakthrough, including a disclaimer that the information is preliminary and subject to change. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive internal review involving legal and compliance to verify the accuracy and completeness of the findings, and to assess potential market impact and disclosure risks before releasing any information. Option C. Release the preliminary findings to select industry analysts and key investors first to gauge their reaction before a public announcement. Option D. Delay the announcement indefinitely until all aspects of the breakthrough are fully understood and commercially validated, to avoid any potential misinterpretations. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive internal review involving legal and compliance to verify the accuracy and completeness of the findings, and to assess potential market impact and disclosure risks before releasing any information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for timely information dissemination with the regulatory obligation to ensure accuracy and prevent market manipulation. The pressure to release positive news quickly can lead to overlooking potential misinterpretations or the need for further verification, which could have significant consequences for investors and the company's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a thorough review process involving multiple stakeholders, including legal and compliance departments. This aligns with the principles of fair disclosure and investor protection mandated by securities regulations. By ensuring all information is accurate, complete, and not misleading before public release, the company upholds its duty to provide material information in a manner that does not create an unfair advantage or disadvantage for any market participant. This proactive verification process is a cornerstone of regulatory compliance and ethical business conduct, preventing potential violations related to insider trading or misleading statements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately releasing the preliminary findings without independent verification. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for accurate and complete disclosure. It risks disseminating information that may be incomplete, misinterpreted, or ultimately incorrect, potentially leading to market confusion or even manipulation. This could be viewed as a violation of rules against making false or misleading statements to investors. Another incorrect approach is to delay the release indefinitely due to minor, unconfirmed details. While thoroughness is important, an unreasonable delay in releasing material information can also be problematic. It can create an information vacuum, potentially leading to speculation and rumors, or it could be seen as an attempt to selectively disclose information to favored parties. This approach neglects the principle of timely disclosure of material information. A third incorrect approach is to release the information with a disclaimer that it is preliminary and subject to change. While disclaimers can offer some protection, they do not absolve the company of its responsibility to ensure the accuracy and completeness of information released to the market. If the preliminary information is significantly misleading, a disclaimer may not be sufficient to mitigate regulatory or legal repercussions. The core obligation remains to provide accurate material information. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical considerations. This involves establishing clear internal protocols for information review and dissemination. When faced with a situation like this, the process should include 1. Identifying the materiality of the information. 2. Consulting with relevant internal departments, legal, compliance, investor relations, to assess risks and ensure adherence to disclosure policies. 3. Implementing a robust verification process to confirm the accuracy and completeness of the information. 4. Determining the appropriate timing and method of disclosure to ensure fair access for all investors. This systematic approach mitigates risks and upholds professional integrity. Question 8. Quality control measures reveal a minor deviation from the specified material tolerance during the manufacturing of a critical aircraft component. The deviation is within a range that has historically not led to immediate functional failure and the production schedule is under significant pressure to meet a delivery deadline. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Override the quality control alert, as the deviation is within a historically acceptable range, and continue production to meet the deadline. Option B. Attempt to rework the affected components to bring them within tolerance without formally documenting the deviation or the rework process. Option C. Proceed with the production of the affected batch, assuming the deviation is minor enough not to impact performance, and address it later if any issues arise. Option D. Initiate the documented nonconformance reporting procedure. Halt further processing of the affected batch until the deviation is reviewed and dispositioned by authorized personnel, and ensure all actions are recorded. Correct answer is D. Initiate the documented nonconformance reporting procedure. Halt further processing of the affected batch until the deviation is reviewed and dispositioned by authorized personnel, and ensure all actions are recorded. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate potential conflicts between established quality control procedures and the immediate pressure to meet production targets. The core of the challenge lies in upholding the integrity of the manufacturing process and product safety, which are paramount in the aerospace industry, against the temptation to overlook minor deviations that might seem insignificant in the short term, but could have serious, long-term consequences. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency with unwavering adherence to safety and quality standards. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the established quality control protocols and the safety of the final product. By initiating a formal review process and documenting the deviation, the individual demonstrates a commitment to the Boeing Quality Management System, QMS, and its underlying principles, which are designed to ensure airworthiness and customer safety. This aligns with the fundamental ethical obligation to act with integrity and competence, and the regulatory expectation that all deviations from approved processes are thoroughly investigated and addressed. This proactive stance prevents potential future failures and reinforces a culture of continuous improvement and accountability. An incorrect approach that involves overlooking the deviation and proceeding with production without proper documentation or investigation represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action bypasses the established QMS, which is likely mandated by regulatory bodies such as the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, in the U.S. Such a failure could lead to the production of non-conforming parts, compromising aircraft safety, and potentially violating FAA regulations regarding airworthiness and manufacturing standards. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of integrity and a disregard for the responsibility to ensure product safety. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to fix the deviation informally without following the documented procedure, also constitutes a regulatory and ethical failure. This circumvents the audit trail and the necessary verification steps, meaning the correction might not be effective or might introduce new issues. It undermines the transparency and traceability required by quality management systems and regulatory oversight. This approach prioritizes expediency over thoroughness and compliance, which is unacceptable in a safety-critical industry. A third incorrect approach, such as blaming the quality control system itself for being too stringent, is a failure to understand the purpose of such systems. Quality control measures are not arbitrary. They are designed to mitigate risks and ensure compliance with stringent safety and performance standards. Questioning the validity of the system rather than addressing the deviation within its framework is a sign of poor professional judgment and a lack of understanding of the regulatory environment. It deflects responsibility and fails to address the root cause of the issue. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's QMS, relevant regulatory requirements, e.g., FAA regulations for U.S.-based aerospace manufacturing, and ethical principles. When a deviation is identified, the professional should 1. Immediately recognize and document the deviation according to established procedures. 2. Assess the potential impact of the deviation on product safety and performance. 3. Initiate the formal review and corrective action process as outlined in the QMS. 4. Communicate the issue to the appropriate personnel and stakeholders. 5. Ensure that no further action is taken that could compromise product integrity until the deviation is resolved and approved. This systematic approach ensures accountability, compliance, and the highest standards of safety. Question 9. During the evaluation of a potential acquisition target, A Boeing executive receives preliminary, unconfirmed financial projections from the target company's CFO that appear significantly more favorable than publicly available information. The executive recognizes this information could substantially impact Boeing's stock price if it were to become public. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Boeing executive to ensure compliance with U.S. securities regulations and ethical standards? Option A. Hold on to the information until the acquisition is finalized, at which point it can be incorporated into the public announcement of the deal. Option B. Dismiss the projections as preliminary and unconfirmed, and take no further action unless the target company officially releases them. Option C. Immediately disseminate the projections to a select group of senior Boeing management and key financial analysts to gauge their reaction and potential impact on investment strategy. Option D. Conduct a thorough internal review to verify the accuracy and materiality of the projections, and if deemed material and non-public, initiate the process for public disclosure through appropriate SEC filings. The correct answer is C. Immediately disseminate the projections to a select group of senior Boeing management and key financial analysts to gauge their reaction and potential impact on investment strategy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to secure a competitive advantage and the regulatory obligation to ensure fair and transparent market practices. The pressure to act quickly on potentially market-moving information, while simultaneously adhering to strict insider trading prohibitions, requires a nuanced understanding of what constitutes material non-public information and the appropriate channels for its dissemination. The risk of misinterpreting or misusing such information can lead to severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of investor confidence. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a rigorous internal review process to determine if the information is indeed material and non-public. If it is, the appropriate regulatory disclosure mechanisms must be followed, such as filing a Form 8K with the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, in the U.S. This ensures that all investors receive the information simultaneously, thereby maintaining market fairness and preventing any individual or group from gaining an unfair advantage. This aligns with the principles of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, specifically Rule 10b-5, which prohibits fraud and manipulation in connection with the purchase or sale of securities. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately share the information with a select group of key stakeholders, such as major institutional investors or board members, before public disclosure. This constitutes selective disclosure, a violation of Regulation FD, fair disclosure, in the U.S., which mandates that when a company discloses material non-public information to certain individuals, it must also make public disclosure of that information. This practice creates an uneven playing field and can lead to insider trading accusations. Another incorrect approach is to delay public disclosure indefinitely, hoping the information becomes less significant or is superseded by other events. This can be interpreted as an attempt to manipulate the market or to avoid negative market reactions, which is a violation of securities laws and ethical standards. Companies have a responsibility to inform the market in a timely manner. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the information as insignificant without proper due diligence, especially if it originates from a less senior employee. The materiality of information is determined by its potential to influence an investor's decision, regardless of the source. Failing to investigate potentially material information can lead to regulatory scrutiny and penalties for noncompliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should follow a structured decision-making process. First, they must identify and clearly define the information in question. Second, they should assess its materiality and whether it is non-public, consulting with legal and compliance departments as necessary. Third, they must determine the appropriate regulatory disclosure requirements based on the jurisdiction, in this case, U.S. securities laws. Finally, they should execute the disclosure process meticulously, ensuring all stakeholders receive the information simultaneously and in compliance with all applicable regulations. This systematic approach minimizes risk and upholds professional integrity. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals that certain pre-screening questions within the Boeing hiring assessment test are perceived as time-consuming by candidates, potentially impacting completion rates. A proposal is made to streamline these questions by rephrasing them to be more direct and less open-ended, aiming to reduce the overall assessment duration. However, there is concern that this simplification might inadvertently alter the psychometric properties of the questions, or compromise the assessment's ability to accurately gauge critical competencies required for aviation roles, as stipulated by the Boeing Hiring Assessment Tests Framework, which approach best balances the need for efficiency with the integrity of the assessment process, according to the Boeing Hiring Assessment Tests Regulatory Framework. Option A. Rely on anecdotal evidence from recruiters about the perceived time burden and proceed with the streamlined questions, as the primary goal is to improve candidate experience and reduce drop-off rates. Option B. Remove the perceived time-consuming questions entirely to significantly reduce assessment duration, assuming that other parts of the assessment will adequately cover the necessary competencies. Option C. Implement the streamlined questions immediately to capitalize on potential efficiency gains, with a plan to conduct a post-implementation review of candidate feedback and completion rates. Option D. Conduct a thorough validation study of the rephrased questions, comparing their psychometric properties and predictive validity against the original questions, ensuring they still align with the competency requirements outlined in the Boeing Hiring Assessment Tests guidelines before any implementation. The correct answer is C. Implement the streamlined questions immediately to capitalize on potential efficiency gains, with a plan to conduct a post-implementation review of candidate feedback and completion rates. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the pursuit of operational efficiency with the imperative of adhering to stringent regulatory requirements and ethical conduct. The pressure to demonstrate cost savings can lead to shortcuts or misinterpretations of compliance obligations, potentially exposing the company to significant legal and reputational risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of integrity or regulatory standing. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding and application of the relevant regulatory framework, specifically the Boeing Hiring Assessment Tests stipulated guidelines. This approach ensures that any proposed changes are evaluated not only for their efficiency benefits, but also for their compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and risk management, which are paramount in a highly regulated industry like aerospace. By seeking clarification and ensuring alignment with the Boeing Hiring Assessment Tests specific requirements, the professional acts with due diligence and upholds the integrity of the hiring process. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory compliance fails to acknowledge the legal and ethical obligations inherent in the hiring process. This could lead to violations of employment laws or internal company policies, resulting in fines, lawsuits, and damage to the company's reputation. Another incorrect approach that implements changes based on assumptions or incomplete information, without verifying their compatibility with the Boeing Hiring Assessment Tests framework, risks introducing procedural errors or biases that could invalidate assessment results or lead to discriminatory practices. This demonstrates a lack of professional rigor and a disregard for established standards. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of any proposed change. This includes 1. Identifying the core objective e.g., efficiency. 2. Thoroughly understanding the relevant regulatory and policy landscape, in this case the Boeing Hiring Assessment Test specific guidelines. 3. Analyzing the potential impact of the proposed change on compliance and ethical considerations. 4. Seeking expert advice or clarification when uncertainties exist. 5. Implementing changes only after confirming full alignment with all requirements and conducting a risk assessment. Question 11. Market research demonstrates that a significant portion of the public believes that individuals with access to non-public material information about a company have an unfair advantage in the stock market. As an employee of a publicly traded company, you inadvertently overhear a conversation detailing an upcoming, significant product recall that is not yet public knowledge and is expected to negatively impact the company's stock price. You have no prior knowledge of this recall. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Purchase put options on the company's stock to profit from the expected price decline. Option B. Wait a few days to see if the information becomes public before making any trading decisions. Option C. Immediately refrain from trading any securities of the company and report the overheard information to the company's compliance department. Option D. Share the overheard information with a trusted friend who is an experienced investor, suggesting they consider selling their holdings. Correct answer is C. Immediately refrain from trading any securities of the company and report the overheard information to the company's compliance department. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge involving the ethical and regulatory implications of using non-public information for personal gain, a concept known as insider trading. The professional challenge lies in distinguishing between legitimate market analysis and the misuse of confidential information obtained through one's position. Navigating this requires a strong understanding of securities regulations and internal company policies designed to prevent such abuses. The pressure to act quickly on potentially lucrative information, coupled with the inherent risk of severe penalties if done improperly, demands careful judgment and adherence to strict ethical guidelines. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves recognizing the confidential nature of the information and refraining from trading based on it. This aligns with the principles of fair markets and investor protection mandated by securities regulations. Specifically, it upholds the prohibition against trading on material, non-public information, MNPI. Best professional practice dictates prioritizing compliance with these regulations and company policies over potential personal profit. This demonstrates integrity and a commitment to maintaining the trust placed in professionals within the financial industry. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves trading on the information immediately, assuming it is not truly material or that the risk of detection is low. This directly violates securities laws that prohibit insider trading. The regulatory failure here is the disregard for the definition of material non-public information and the assumption that personal judgment can override established legal prohibitions. Ethically, this is a breach of trust and fairness. Another incorrect approach is to discuss the information with a close friend or family member who is not privy to the information, encouraging them to trade. This constitutes tipping and is also illegal under insider trading regulations. The regulatory failure is facilitating insider trading by another party. Ethically, it extends the breach of trust and fairness to others. A third incorrect approach is to wait a short period before trading, believing that the information will eventually become public. While this might reduce the immediate risk of detection, it does not negate the fact that the trade is still based on MNPI. The regulatory failure is the continued reliance on confidential information for trading, even if delayed. Ethically, it represents a continued disregard for the spirit of fair market practices. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the nature of the information. Is it material and non-public? 2. Consulting internal policies and compliance officers. When in doubt, seek guidance. 3. Refraining from any trading or communication that could be construed as insider trading or tipping. 4. Documenting the decision-making process, especially if seeking advice. This systematic approach ensures that actions are defensible and align with professional standards and legal requirements. Question 12. Regulatory review indicates that a new software system is being considered for integration into Boeing's manufacturing operations, which will process sensitive customer data. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with applicable data protection regulations and ethical handling of customer information? Option A. Integrate the software system and then initiate a review of data protection requirements to determine if any retrospective adjustments are needed. Option B. Conduct a thorough data privacy and security risk assessment of the new software. Engage legal and compliance teams to validate its adherence to relevant regulations and implement necessary security controls before full integration. Option C. Rely solely on the software vendor's assurances regarding data security and compliance, assuming their product meets all necessary regulatory standards. Option D. Proceed with the integration of the new software system immediately to leverage its operational benefits and address any data protection concerns that arise post-integration. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough data privacy and security risk assessment of the new software. Engage legal and compliance teams to validate its adherence to relevant regulations and implement necessary security controls before full integration. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between business objectives and the stringent requirements of regulatory compliance, specifically concerning the handling of sensitive customer data within the aerospace manufacturing context. The need to integrate new software systems while ensuring adherence to data privacy regulations, such as those potentially governed by U.S. federal laws and industry-specific guidelines applicable to Boeing, demands meticulous planning and execution. The challenge lies in balancing the efficiency gains promised by the new software with the non-negotiable obligation to protect customer information from unauthorized access or disclosure. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive risk assessment and the implementation of robust data security measures for full system integration. This proactive stance aligns with the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and security by design, which are foundational to many data protection frameworks. By engaging legal and compliance teams early, and by conducting thorough testing of the software's data handling capabilities against regulatory standards, the organization demonstrates a commitment to lawful and ethical data processing. This minimizes the likelihood of breaches, regulatory penalties, and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with integration without adequate security validation would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate principles of due diligence and responsible data stewardship, potentially contravening laws that mandate specific security safeguards for sensitive information. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on vendor assurances without independent verification, demonstrates a lack of critical oversight and an abdication of responsibility for data protection. This could lead to noncompliance if the vendor's claims are inaccurate or if their security practices are insufficient. A third incorrect approach, delaying compliance activities until after integration, is fundamentally flawed as it places the organization in a reactive, rather than proactive, posture, increasing the risk of noncompliance and the associated consequences. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, risk-based approach. This includes identifying all applicable regulations and guidelines, understanding the specific data flows and types of sensitive information involved, conducting a thorough assessment of potential risks to data privacy and security, consulting with legal, compliance, and IT security experts, developing and implementing appropriate controls and safeguards, and establishing ongoing monitoring and auditing mechanisms. Prioritizing compliance from the outset, rather than as an afterthought, is crucial for maintaining trust and operating within legal and ethical boundaries. Question 13. Compliance review shows that a manufacturing team has identified a potential deviation from an approved design specification during the production of a critical aircraft component. The team is concerned that addressing this deviation will significantly impact their ability to meet the current quarter's production targets. They are debating whether to proceed with production to meet the target and address the deviation later, or to halt production and report the issue immediately. Option A, continue production to meet the target and then address the deviation in the next production cycle to avoid impacting current performance metrics. Option B, halt production immediately and formally report the potential deviation to the relevant internal compliance department and regulatory authorities as per company policy and U.S. aviation regulations. Option C, discuss the issue with the production manager to see if the target can be adjusted to accommodate the necessary rework without formal reporting. Option D, attempt to subtly modify the component to align with the specification without formally reporting the deviation, assuming the change is minor. The correct answer is B. Halt production immediately and formally report the potential deviation to the relevant internal compliance department and regulatory authorities as per company policy and U.S. aviation regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and regulatory adherence. Pressure to meet production targets can lead to a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance issues. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficiency and output with the absolute requirement to uphold safety and regulatory standards, especially in a highly regulated industry like aerospace manufacturing. A failure to do so can have severe consequences, including safety risks, legal penalties, and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes immediate reporting and investigation of the potential noncompliance. This aligns with the core principles of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct in the aerospace industry. Specifically, it reflects the requirements of U.S. aviation regulations, such as those enforced by the FAA, which mandate a proactive and transparent approach to identifying and rectifying any deviations from approved design or manufacturing processes. Prompt reporting ensures that potential safety issues are addressed before they can impact aircraft integrity or passenger safety. This also demonstrates a commitment to a strong safety culture and adherence to the company's own internal compliance policies, which are designed to meet or exceed regulatory expectations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves delaying the reporting of the potential noncompliance until after the production target is met. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It prioritizes a short-term business goal over safety and compliance, which is unacceptable in aerospace. Such a delay could allow a non-compliant part or process to be incorporated into multiple aircraft, exponentially increasing the risk and the scope of any subsequent corrective action. This directly violates the principle of immediate disclosure of potential safety defects. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to rectify the issue internally without formal reporting, hoping to avoid scrutiny. This is also a serious failure. It undermines the established reporting channels and bypasses the oversight mechanisms designed to ensure regulatory compliance. This approach suggests a lack of integrity and a willingness to conceal potential problems, which is antithetical to a robust compliance program and a strong safety culture. It also prevents proper documentation and root cause analysis, which are critical for preventing recurrence. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a clear decision-making process rooted in regulatory requirements and ethical principles. First, immediately assess the nature and potential severity of the identified issue. Second, consult the company's internal compliance policies and relevant regulatory guidance, in this case, U.S. aviation regulations. Third, initiate the formal reporting procedure without delay, providing all known details. Fourth, cooperate fully with any subsequent investigation and corrective action process. This systematic approach ensures that safety and compliance are paramount, fostering trust with regulatory bodies, and upholding the company's commitment to producing safe and reliable aircraft. Question 14. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a proposed streamlining of the candidate onboarding process for the Boeing hiring assessment test might inadvertently bypass a critical data validation step mandated by the test's governing regulatory framework. Which of the following actions best addresses this potential compliance risk? Option A. Immediately implement the streamlined process, assuming the bypass step was a legacy requirement no longer strictly enforced, and monitor for any immediate adverse feedback. Option B. Rely on the IT department's assurance that the underlying system architecture can still perform the validation if needed, even if it's not explicitly triggered by the new workflow. Option C. Delegate the decision to proceed with the streamlined process to the hiring manager, who is most familiar with the operational needs of candidate assessment. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed process changes against the specific regulatory requirements outlined for the Boeing hiring assessment test, documenting any identified deviations and their potential impact on compliance. The correct answer is A. Immediately implement the streamlined process, assuming the bypass step was a legacy requirement no longer strictly enforced, and monitor for any immediate adverse feedback. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a business objective, streamlining a process, and the imperative of maintaining robust regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with changes to established procedures that have regulatory implications. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not compromise adherence to the specified regulatory framework. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, documented review of the proposed changes against the relevant regulatory requirements. This proactive stance ensures that any potential deviations or new risks are identified and addressed before implementation. It aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and risk management, which mandate that all business activities must operate within legal and regulatory boundaries. Specifically, It reflects the need for due diligence and a systematic approach to change management when regulatory compliance is a factor. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the perceived efficiency gains without a comprehensive regulatory review fails to uphold the company's obligation to comply with the Boeing hiring assessment tests regulatory framework. This oversight could lead to unintentional violations, resulting in penalties, reputational damage, and potential legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach that relies on informal assurances or past practices without verifying current regulatory alignment is equally flawed. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the dynamic nature of regulations, which can be updated or reinterpreted. A third incorrect approach that delegates the entire review to a department with limited regulatory expertise, without oversight from compliance or legal, risks overlooking critical nuances and misinterpreting requirements, thereby exposing the company to significant compliance risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory context. When considering changes to processes, the first step is to identify all applicable regulations. Next, a risk assessment should be conducted to evaluate the potential impact of the proposed changes on compliance. This assessment should involve relevant stakeholders, including those responsible for the process, compliance officers, and legal counsel. Decisions should be based on a clear understanding of regulatory obligations and a documented rationale for how the proposed changes maintain or enhance compliance. If there is any doubt, seeking expert advice or clarification from regulatory bodies is paramount. Question 15. Implementation of a new aircraft component design is nearing its final stages, and the project team is under significant pressure to meet a critical delivery deadline. The lead engineer proposes to expedite the final risk assessment by relying heavily on historical data from similar, but not identical, past projects and by deferring a detailed analysis of potential failure modes for certain novel aspects of the new design until after initial production begins. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and best professional practices for risk assessment in this scenario? Option A. Delegate the responsibility for the final risk assessment to a single junior engineer to expedite the process, with minimal oversight from senior management. Option B. Rely primarily on historical data from previous projects for the risk assessment, assuming that the similarities outweigh any potential differences in the new design. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that includes a thorough analysis of potential failure modes for all design aspects, including the novel elements, and integrate findings into the design and production plans before the critical deadline, even if it requires adjusting the timeline. Option D. Proceed with the proposed expedited risk assessment, prioritizing the delivery deadline, and address any identified risks during the post-production phase. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that includes a thorough analysis of potential failure modes for all design aspects, including the novel elements, and integrate findings into the design and production plans before the critical deadline, even if it requires adjusting the timeline. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of robust risk management. The pressure to deliver a project on time and within budget can lead to shortcuts that bypass essential risk assessment steps, potentially exposing the organization to significant unforeseen consequences. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate these risks proactively rather than reactively. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and comprehensive risk assessment process, aligning with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance. Specifically, within the context of a U.S.-regulated environment for an aerospace company like Boeing, this would involve adhering to established safety management systems, SMS, frameworks, such as those outlined by the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA). A thorough risk assessment, including hazard identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation, is fundamental to ensuring the safety and reliability of aircraft and associated systems. This proactive approach helps prevent incidents, maintain public trust, and comply with stringent aviation safety regulations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a commensurate risk assessment fails to uphold the ethical duty of care owed to passengers, crew, and the public. This bypasses critical safety protocols and could lead to regulatory violations, fines, and severe reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that relies on historical data alone without considering new or evolving risks overlooks the dynamic nature of aviation and technological advancements. This can result in a false sense of security and leave the organization vulnerable to novel threats. An approach that delegates risk assessment entirely to a single department without cross-functional input or senior management oversight creates a siloed and potentially incomplete understanding of risks, undermining the effectiveness of the entire risk management framework. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and internal policies governing risk management. This involves clearly defining the scope of the assessment, identifying all potential stakeholders, and utilizing a structured methodology for hazard identification and risk analysis. Crucially, the process should involve cross-functional collaboration and clear communication channels to ensure all relevant perspectives are considered. Regular review and updating of risk assessments are also vital to adapt to changing circumstances and maintain an effective risk management posture. Question 16. Stakeholder feedback indicates a growing concern regarding the potential for minor operational disruptions to cascade into more significant safety events. While the specific incidents cited are infrequent and have not resulted in actual harm, the frequency of near misses has increased. How should the risk assessment process be adapted to address this feedback effectively and compliantly? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of historical near-miss data, identify common contributing factors, and develop targeted mitigation strategies for those factors, documenting the entire process and its alignment with aviation safety regulations. Option B. Immediately implement a series of new, stringent operational procedures across all departments to preemptively address any potential disruption, without a detailed analysis of the specific feedback. Option C. Acknowledge the feedback in a general statement to stakeholders, assuring them that the company takes their concerns seriously, but continue with existing risk assessment protocols as the cited incidents are not critical. Option D. Prioritize addressing the most vocal stakeholders' concerns by reallocating resources to investigate their specific examples, even if they represent a small fraction of the overall feedback. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of historical near-miss data, identify common contributing factors, and develop targeted mitigation strategies for those factors, documenting the entire process and its alignment with aviation safety regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing competing interests and potential risks identified by stakeholders with the need to maintain operational efficiency and compliance. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and acting upon feedback that may be subjective, incomplete, or even contradictory, while ensuring that any proposed changes are grounded in a robust risk assessment framework that aligns with regulatory expectations. The pressure to respond quickly to stakeholder concerns must be tempered by a methodical and evidence-based approach to risk management. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and documented process for evaluating identified risks. By engaging with stakeholders to understand the nuances of their feedback, and then applying a structured risk assessment methodology, professionals can objectively identify, analyze, and prioritize risks. This ensures that mitigation strategies are proportionate to the identified threats and are aligned with relevant regulatory requirements, such as those governing aviation safety and operational integrity. This methodical approach fosters transparency, accountability, and defensibility in decision-making, which are critical for maintaining trust and compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate stakeholder demands without a proper risk assessment fails to address the underlying issues comprehensively. This could lead to reactive, potentially ineffective, or even counterproductive changes that do not adequately mitigate the actual risks, thereby violating principles of due diligence and responsible risk management. Another incorrect approach that dismisses stakeholder feedback outright, even if it seems minor, risks overlooking emerging threats or systemic issues. This demonstrates a lack of responsiveness and can lead to reputational damage and potential regulatory scrutiny for failing to consider all relevant information. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal judgment without a structured framework is prone to bias and inconsistency, undermining the integrity of the risk assessment process and potentially leading to non-compliance with established safety and operational standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the scope of the risk assessment based on stakeholder feedback. This involves active listening and clarification to fully understand the concerns. Subsequently, a structured risk assessment process should be initiated, involving risk identification, analysis, likelihood and impact, evaluation and treatment. This process should be documented thoroughly. The chosen mitigation strategies must be evaluated for their effectiveness, cost-benefit, and alignment with regulatory obligations. Regular review and monitoring of identified risks and implemented controls are essential to ensure ongoing effectiveness and adapt to changing circumstances. Question 17. The control framework reveals a potential for unforeseen operational disruptions due to the integration of novel autonomous flight control systems. Which approach to assessing the associated risks best aligns with robust safety management principles and regulatory expectations for aerospace development? Option A. Prioritize identifying potential failure modes of the new autonomous systems and analyze their impact on critical flight functions and overall aircraft safety, using a combination of simulation, expert judgment, and limited empirical data from similar, but not identical, systems. Option B. Focus exclusively on historical incident data from conventional flight control systems, assuming that the new autonomous systems will not introduce fundamentally different risk profiles. Option C. Defer comprehensive risk assessment until extensive operational data from the new autonomous systems becomes available, as any assessment without such data would be speculative. Option D. Conduct a detailed analysis of only those risks with extremely low probabilities but catastrophic consequences, as these represent the most significant potential threats. The correct answer is A. Prioritize identifying potential failure modes of the new autonomous systems and analyze their impact on critical flight functions and overall aircraft safety, using a combination of simulation, expert judgment, and limited empirical data from similar but not identical systems. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for timely risk identification with the practical limitations of available data and resources. The core difficulty lies in making informed decisions about potential risks when the information is incomplete or uncertain, a common situation in complex operational environments like aerospace manufacturing. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overreacting to speculative risks and underestimating genuine threats. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, evidence-informed methodology for risk assessment. By focusing on identifying potential failure modes and their impact on critical systems, it aligns with the principles of robust safety management and regulatory compliance. This method ensures that resources are directed towards the most significant risks, fostering a proactive safety culture. This is ethically sound as it prioritizes the safety of personnel and the public, and it is regulatorily compliant by adhering to established aerospace safety standards that mandate thorough risk analysis. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical incident data without considering new design elements or operational changes would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to account for emergent risks associated with novel technologies or processes, potentially leading to a false sense of security. Ethically, this could result in overlooking new hazards, and regulatorily, it would likely violate requirements for forward-looking risk assessments that consider all relevant factors. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on low-probability, high-impact events, while seemingly prudent, can be problematic if it neglects more frequent, lower-impact events that, in aggregate, could still pose significant risks. This can lead to misallocation of resources and an incomplete understanding of the overall risk landscape. Ethically, it might mean failing to address risks that, while individually minor, could cumulatively affect operational integrity or employee well-being. Regulatorily, it might not meet the comprehensive risk assessment requirements that demand consideration of all significant risk categories. A third incorrect approach that dismisses potential risks due to a lack of immediate quantifiable data is also professionally unsound. While data is crucial, risk assessment often involves expert judgment and scenario planning when definitive data is unavailable. Ignoring potential risks based solely on current data limitations is a failure of foresight and can lead to significant unforeseen consequences. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of due diligence in protecting against potential harm, and regulatorily, it would likely contravene mandates for proactive risk identification and mitigation. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted approach. First, clearly define the scope of the risk assessment. Second, identify potential hazards and failure modes, drawing on historical data, expert knowledge, and foresight regarding new technologies or processes. Third, analyze the likelihood and impact of identified risks, using qualitative and, where possible, quantitative methods. Fourth, evaluate the identified risks against established risk tolerance criteria. Fifth, develop and implement appropriate mitigation strategies. Finally, establish a process for ongoing monitoring, review, and adaptation of the risk assessment as new information becomes available or circumstances change. This iterative process ensures that risk management remains dynamic and effective. Question 18. The risk matrix shows a potential component failure as having a low probability and a low impact. However, this component is critical for a secondary safety system that, if compromised, could indirectly affect the primary flight control system under specific, albeit rare, environmental conditions. What is the most appropriate next step in the risk assessment process? Option A. Conduct a deeper qualitative analysis to understand the cascading effects of this failure on the primary flight control system and its potential impact on overall aircraft safety, considering the rare environmental conditions. Option B. Document the risk as identified but take no further action, assuming that the low rating indicates it is not a significant concern for the program. Option C. Focus mitigation efforts solely on the immediate, direct failure of the component, without considering its interaction with other systems or environmental factors. Option D. Accept the risk as presented on the matrix, as the probability and immediate impact are both rated as low, and reallocate resources to higher-rated risks. The correct answer is A. Conduct a deeper qualitative analysis to understand the cascading effects of this failure on the primary flight control system and its potential impact on overall aircraft safety, considering the rare environmental conditions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to move beyond a purely quantitative assessment of risk, as depicted by a risk matrix, and engage in qualitative judgment regarding the impact of potential risk event on a critical aerospace program. The risk matrix, while useful for prioritization, often simplifies complex realities. The challenge lies in recognizing when a seemingly low probability, low impact event, as initially categorized, could have cascading, severe consequences that are not fully captured by the matrix's discrete scales. This demands a deep understanding of the program's interdependencies, regulatory environment, and the potential for unforeseen consequences. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, qualitative reassessment of the risk based on its potential downstream effects, even if the initial matrix rating was low. This aligns with the principles of robust risk management in the aerospace industry, which emphasizes proactive identification and mitigation of potential failures that could compromise safety, regulatory compliance, or program success. Specifically, in the context of U.S. aviation regulations, e.g., FAA guidelines on safety management systems, there is a strong emphasis on understanding the systemic nature of risks and the importance of considering all potential failure modes and their consequences, regardless of initial probability assessments. This approach demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to safety beyond mere checklist compliance. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the initial risk matrix rating, without further investigation, fails to acknowledge the limitations of such tools in capturing complex, interconnected risks. This represents a regulatory failure by potentially overlooking significant hazards that could violate FAA safety standards. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility to ensure the highest level of safety. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on the immediate, direct impact of the risk, ignoring potential secondary or tertiary effects, also falls short. This is a failure to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment as mandated by industry best practices and regulatory expectations, which require considering the full spectrum of consequences. Finally, an approach that dismisses the risk due to its low probability, without considering the severity of the potential outcome, is a critical oversight. This directly contravenes the principle of alarm, as low as reasonably practicable in risk management, where even low-probability events with catastrophic outcomes require significant mitigation efforts. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with the initial risk assessment, like the matrix, but then mandates a qualitative overlay. This involves asking what-if questions, considering system interdependencies, consulting subject matter experts, and evaluating the potential impact on safety, regulatory compliance, and program objectives. The process should involve a feedback loop, where initial assessments are challenged and refined based on deeper analysis of potential consequences. Question 19. Investigation of potential geopolitical instability in a key supplier region prompts a review of Boeing's supply chain risk assessment protocols. Which of the following represents the most prudent and professionally responsible approach to managing this emerging risk? Option A. Rely solely on historical supply chain performance data, assuming that past stability will continue despite current geopolitical shifts. Option B. Ignore the geopolitical developments, assuming they will not directly affect the company's operations or its suppliers. Option C. Conduct a thorough assessment of the geopolitical situation, identifying critical components sourced from the region, and evaluating the potential impact on production and safety before implementing any mitigation measures. Option D. Initiate immediate, significant diversification of all suppliers in the affected region without a detailed impact analysis. The correct answer is D. Initiate immediate, significant diversification of all suppliers in the affected region without a detailed impact analysis. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent uncertainty in predicting the impact of external geopolitical events on a complex global supply chain. Boeing, as a manufacturer of large, complex aircraft, relies on a vast network of suppliers, many of whom may be located in or source materials from regions susceptible to geopolitical instability. The challenge lies in proactively identifying and assessing these risks without succumbing to speculation or paralysis by analysis, while ensuring that any mitigation strategies are proportionate and do not unduly disrupt operations or supplier relationships. The need for timely and accurate risk assessment is paramount to maintaining production schedules, ensuring aircraft safety, and meeting contractual obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and data-driven assessment of potential geopolitical risks. This includes identifying key supplier locations, understanding their reliance on specific regions, and monitoring geopolitical developments through credible intelligence sources. The focus should be on assessing the likelihood and potential impact of disruptions on critical components or materials. This aligns with best professional practice in risk management, emphasizing a proactive, rather than reactive, stance. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing aviation safety and supply chain integrity, implicitly require robust risk assessment processes to ensure the continued airworthiness of aircraft and the reliability of the supply chain. Ethically, it demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to stakeholder interests, including customers and the flying public, by minimizing potential disruptions. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the potential impact of geopolitical events due to their perceived remoteness or infrequency. This represents a failure in due diligence and a disregard for established risk management principles. It can lead to significant operational disruptions, cost overruns, and potential safety compromises if critical components become unavailable. This approach violates the implicit regulatory expectation of anticipating and mitigating foreseeable risks within the supply chain. Another incorrect approach is to overreact to every piece of geopolitical news, leading to hasty and potentially costly changes in sourcing or production without a thorough impact assessment. This can create unnecessary volatility, damage supplier relationships, and introduce new, unforeseen risks. It demonstrates a lack of structured risk assessment and can be seen as an abdication of professional judgment, potentially contravening guidelines that emphasize reasoned decision-making based on evidence. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on historical data without considering the evolving nature of geopolitical risks. While historical data is valuable, current geopolitical landscapes are dynamic and can present novel challenges. Ignoring these evolving dynamics can lead to an incomplete risk profile and inadequate mitigation strategies, failing to meet the forward-looking requirements of effective risk management. Professional reasoning. professionals should adopt a structured risk assessment framework. This involves 1. Risk identification, proactively scanning the geopolitical landscape for potential threats to the supply chain. 2. Risk analysis, evaluating the likelihood and potential impact of identified risks on critical operations. 3. Risk evaluation, prioritizing risks based on their severity and potential consequences. 4. Risk treatment, developing and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies, such as diversifying suppliers, increasing inventory for critical components, or developing contingency plans. 5. Risk monitoring and review, continuously tracking geopolitical developments and reassessing the effectiveness of mitigation strategies. This iterative process ensures that risk management remains dynamic and responsive to changing circumstances, aligning with both regulatory expectations and ethical responsibilities. Question 20. What factors determine the adequacy of a new critical component supplier's risk assessment process for a major aircraft manufacturer? Option A. The results of a single preliminary component test and the supplier's claims of internal quality control measures. Option B. The supplier's assurance of meeting production deadlines and their willingness to provide a basic certificate of conformity for the components. Option C. The supplier's comprehensive quality management system, independent audit results, and the robustness of their component testing protocols under simulated operational stresses. Option D. The supplier's stated adherence to general industry quality standards and their historical positive reputation within the broader manufacturing sector. The correct answer is C. The supplier's comprehensive quality management system, independent audit results, and the robustness of their component testing protocols under simulated operational stresses. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in risk assessment due to the inherent uncertainty and potential for cascading failures within a complex aerospace manufacturing environment. The introduction of a new, unproven supplier for a critical component introduces a significant unknown variable. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for timely production with the absolute imperative of safety and regulatory compliance. A failure to adequately assess and mitigate the risks associated with this new supplier could have catastrophic consequences, impacting not only the company's financial stability, but more importantly, passenger safety and public trust. The pressure to meet production deadlines can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential risks, making rigorous, objective assessment crucial. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted risk assessment that goes beyond a simple review of the supplier's existing certifications. This includes a thorough evaluation of the supplier's manufacturing processes, quality control system, historical performance data, if available from other clients, financial stability, and their own supply chain resilience. It also necessitates on-site audits and rigorous testing of the new component under simulated operational conditions. This approach aligns with the principles of robust risk management mandated by aviation regulatory bodies, which emphasize proactive identification, assessment, and mitigation of potential hazards. Specifically, it reflects the spirit of regulations like those enforced by the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, in the U.S., which require manufacturers to have stringent oversight of their entire supply chain to ensure the airworthiness of their products. This detailed due diligence ensures that potential risks are understood and managed before they can manifest into actual failures, upholding the highest standards of safety and compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. Relying solely on the supplier's self-reported certifications and past industry reputation is professionally unacceptable. While certifications are a baseline requirement, they do not guarantee consistent quality or the ability to meet the specific demands of a new, critical application. This approach fails to account for potential degradation in the supplier's processes, unforeseen production issues, or a lack of understanding of Boeing's unique specifications. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty to ensure product safety. Accepting the component based on a single, positive test result without further investigation is also flawed. A single test, especially if not comprehensive or representative of all operational stresses, can provide a false sense of security. It neglects the possibility of batch-to-batch variation or the impact of long-term operational wear. This approach risks overlooking latent defects that could emerge over time, violating the principle of continuous risk management. Prioritizing production schedule over thorough risk assessment is a direct contravention of aviation safety regulations and ethical obligations. While schedule pressures are real, they can never supersede the paramount importance of safety. This approach demonstrates a severe ethical lapse and a disregard for the regulatory framework that underpins the entire aerospace industry, potentially leading to severe safety incidents and significant legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach to risk assessment. This involves 1. Defining the scope of the risk, clearly identifying what could go wrong and its potential impact. 2. Gathering information, collecting data from multiple sources, including supplier documentation, independent audits, and testing. 3. Analyzing the risk, evaluating the likelihood and severity of identified risks. 4. Evaluating the risk, determining the acceptability of the risk based on regulatory requirements and company policy. 5. Treating the risk, implementing controls to mitigate unacceptable risks. 6. Monitoring and reviewing, continuously assessing the effectiveness of controls and updating the risk assessment as new information becomes available. This iterative process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and prioritize safety and compliance above all else.